Hello and welcome to the VST Roundup. We are recapping a crazy week in high school basketball playoffs. We had a couple of different rounds break out, and there were some upsets, there were some shocking finishes, some buzzer beaters, and some joy and heartbreak all around. We're going to kick it off with the girls' open division, and this one did not disappoint. The 1 versus 8 matchup, Granada Hills hosting San Fernando. The Highlanders have been strong and solid all season. The Tigers had been rolling. We internally had looked at their strength of schedule and weren't sure how they were going to hold up. But this one was a game. Granada Hills triumphed 55-45, and they'll be moving on to the semis. Second game in the top of the bracket, King Drew, 4th seed, Birmingham, the 5th seed. This one came down to the absolute last second. King Drew hit a buzzer beater to break Birmingham's heart. They advanced to face Granada Hills. It was a 53-52 final. Bottom of the bracket, Westchester was hosting Taft. It was a 2-7. And Westchester took care of business. It was a 61-17 final. And then number 3, Crenshaw was hosting number 6, Palisades. And Crenshaw, again, they handled what they had to. It was a 69-52 final. And they advance. It'll be Westchester and Crenshaw in the other semifinal. Kenny, take it away. These games had a little bit of everything.
So in terms of what we were looking at in the open division, the bottom half of the bracket was about statements. The top half of the bracket was about competition. When you look at what Granada and San Fernando did, hats off to San Fernando. I may have been probably one of their harsher critics this year, having, followed the girls on the city section side. I was a little critical of lack of top caliber opponents that they faced this year. And I really looked at them playing an open as a chance for them to kind of prove that they belong there over a team like Hamilton, who did not get that nod in open over them, or teams like Poly, who are in D1, who scheduled a lot tougher than they did during the regular season. But to San Fernando's credit, Samantha Maldonado and crew, they really came in there and they gave Granada Hills a scare as a 1 seed, and they made that a tough game. That game was competitive until things sort of fell apart when San Fernando got in foul trouble towards the end of that game, and Granada Hills did what they had to do, and they moved on to the semifinals. The other West Valley team, the other matchup on that top of the half of that bracket, that Birmingham King Drew, is going to be a game that gets talked about for a long time in the city section in terms of how that game finished. The lack of having their point guard may have hurt Birmingham in this contest. They had a 9-point lead early in the third quarter, and once King Drew kind of got the ball rolling, they were missing that sort of leadership to kind of right the ship that could have kind of kept them ahead. But, you got to give credit to King Drew on their home floor. They fought back. They battled back. Birmingham had that 2-point lead, 1 second to go on the clock, and the young lady hit, a cold-blooded 3 to send King Drew through, and Birmingham ends the season in heartbreaking fashion. So we're going to get a great matchup between Granada Hills and King Drew in that semifinal. On the bottom half of that bracket, like I said, it was about statements for the 2 teams who won. Westchester is a team that I know has probably felt a little bit slighted in the city section, that they haven't been seen as the number 1 team, whether it be by rankings or just public opinion. Because this is a team, quite frankly, they lost 1 game all year, and they kind of felt some type of way about not being the number 1 seed. And they did what you're supposed to do when you think you are the best team and you're going against an opponent that's missing a piece or two and coming into your court, and they put the hammer on them. At one point, this game was 41-7 late in the first half. Taft never had a shot in this game, and Westchester kind of moved on. And then the other game in this bracket, Crenshaw, again, making a statement against Palisades. Palisades was a team that, you can argue whether they could have been in that open or fallen back into D1. Their reputation got them into the open, and Crenshaw said, well, you guys might be good, but you're not better than us. So we've got two very, very good matchups in the semifinals for our Valley representative in Granada Hills taking on King Drew. And in a lot of people's opinion, that Westchester Crenshaw matchup in the other semifinals, a lot of people think that whoever wins that more than has a great shot at taking the Open Division Championship. So it's going to be fun to watch.
It's a great, great time of year. Fun basketball all around. That takes us into D1. When you get into D1 and then D2, now you've got multiple games going on during the week, and we'll be flying through them to make sure we can expedite for time. So the first round of games in D1, top of the bracket, number 8 Arleta took care of business against Narbonne, 62-35. They advanced to face Hamilton. And then going down to the bottom of the bracket, number 7 Verdugo Hills was hosting number 10 Cleveland, and this game was more statement-like for Cleveland. They came out on top 65-54. And then in the very bottom, El Camino was the 6th seed and Van Nuys the 11. El Camino took care of business for sure. It was a 59-35 final. They moved on into the D1 quarters, and Hamilton took care of business against Arleta. It was 61-28. I'm sorry. And Hamilton did what we thought they were going to do. It didn't look like Narbonne or Arleta had a chance to really challenge them too much, and they showed it. Pauley, the number 4 seed, was coming off a bye, and they were facing Garfield. And Pauley did what we expected them to do, setting up that Hamilton and Pauley matchup in the semis. Pauley went over 55-31. And the bottom, Cleveland went into Eagle Rock riding the momentum from that Verdugo Hills win, and they took care of business. It was what you think is going to happen when one team is coming in hot and another team might just be sitting. Cleveland came out on top. It was 48-42. And then down the bottom, El Camino, coming off the victory against Van Nuys, just wasn't able to muster enough against Laces, and Laces took that one 56-42. Kenny, this D1 bracket was a little bit of everything. No major upset, but there was a little surprise there.
Yeah, for sure. Like we talked about last week, my opinion on this D1 bracket was, could any of the teams from the 5 seed down challenge any of the top 4 seeds in this bracket? Because in my opinion, the teams who sat in the top 4 in this bracket were just a cut above and could make a legitimate case and argument that they should have been included in the Open Division. When you look at how strong Hamilton had been all year, when you look at the kind of wins that Eagle Rock put up during the course of the year, when you look at what Laces and Pauley have been this year, those teams have been a cut above and deserve to be mentioned. And I'm sure we're in a conversation for potentially earning Open Division spots. So it was going to be interesting to see if any of those teams that emerged from those first round games could challenge those teams when they played against them in the second round. And what you saw with Arleta and Hamilton, Arleta's a tough, feisty team, but Hamilton has been a team that has sort of floated around in that conversation with the Crenshaws and Granada Hills and King Drews and Westchesters all season long. And they went out and they made a statement, a 33-point win against a very game Arleta Mustang squad, and they move on into the semis. Poly has been one of those teams you've had to keep an eye on all season long. The Leasing Twins are dominant players in the city section, and they showed it again against Garfield. Garfield, the 5 seed, it was a game that we thought potentially could be a tight contest, just the nature of the team sort of being close together. But Poly showed that no, they're primed and ready for a postseason run and then take their best shot at winning the city championship. El Camino had an up and down year, but they came into the playoffs. They beat Van Nuys, and you thought they might have a chance to make it a game, and they did against Laces, but Laces came away with a pretty comfortable victory to move into the semis. But the upset and that question going into this bracket, could there be any of those teams, those lower seeded teams, that could upset the apple cart and keep it from being a all chalk semifinal with how strong the top 4 teams were? And Cleveland showed that despite the struggles they may have had in the West Valley, this is a tough, battle-tested team. They went on the road to Verdugo, and they handled business there, and they carried that red-hot play into Eagle Rock and knocked off Eagle Rock and clinched their spot in the semi. So Cleveland feels like a dangerous team. It doesn't feel like this is a fluke of them being here. And if Laces doesn't come prepared, they could find themselves getting knocked off too, because we know this Cleveland team has talent. Their issue this year has been bodies being in and out of the lineup, and being unhealthy and just playing inconsistent. But the talent has been there for this team. So we have 2 very, very intriguing matchups in the semifinals. One in Hamilton and Poly, which is a rematch of a game from the Huntington Park tournament on January 6th, where Hamilton beat Poly 48-39. It was a competitive game, but one of Poly's key players wasn't eligible to play yet at the time when they played that game. And actually, no, I take that back. Jada Corden did play in that game, but it was one of her first games out playing with Poly. So the continuity just kind of wasn't there the way it has been the last few weeks, where now between Corden and the Leasing Twins, they've sort of formed the big 3 for Poly once they got it all rolling. So it'll be interesting to see how Poly does in a rematch against Hamilton, because the winner of that contest will feel like the odds-on favorite to take the entire thing. It kind of feels maybe sort of like a de facto championship matchup between those 2 teams because of how strong they've been all year. So it's going to be interesting to see. And like I said, can't count out Cleveland, because what they've done so far in the postseason has been a statement that the talent is there. And if they're going to put it together this way, they could walk away with the D1 championship just as well as the other 3 top seeds that are there. So
yeah, that's definitely enticing and intriguing. There's a lot that could happen there, and I'm looking forward to it. And I'm moving into D2. The play-in round, Northridge Academy was hosting Marquez, and they did what you want to do when you get a home game in the playoffs. Played a decent game, good game, and they came out on top 50-32, getting them a not so coveted matchup with Chatsworth, even though you want to win that first round. You want to win games. So that's what they did. And then up on the top of the bracket, going in the next round, Sylmar went into Carson, and this was one of the heartbreaks we were talking about. It was a 51-50 final for Carson. They advanced to face San Pedro in the quarterfinals. All right, and then Northridge Academy's victory got them a matchup with Chatsworth, as we were saying. Chatsworth did what you are expected to do against a level of opponent who just doesn't kind of measure up. Not a knock on Northridge Academy. Just, unfortunately, they're not quite there yet. And Chatsworth did what they were supposed to. It was a 68-29 final. And then the final Valley matchup in D2, Kennedy went into Lincoln, and I mean, you could call it an upset. but Kennedy's been playing some basically playoff basketball for the last few weeks. And they kept it rolling. It was a 45-31 final. Kennedy goes on to face Chatsworth in the quarterfinals, and that is the only Valley matchup we have in D2.
Yeah, so in terms of D2 coming into this playoff, you really kind of felt similar to D1. It was about the top 4 seeds and what they would be able to do, and having in terms of would there be any hiccups along the way for these 4 teams? Because quite frankly, when you look at San Pedro, Southgate, Chatsworth, and Marshall, these are 4 teams that are technically locked in the D2. But if you've watched any of them play, you know that there's D1 or better talent on those particular squads. So in terms for us in the Valley, kind of looking at how that round shaped up, you feel for Selmar. It was a tough go, tough ask to go on the road to Carson, take the trip out there, and they very nearly came away with the victory. So that the road sort of ends for Selmar there. North Hollywood, it's been an up and down season for North Hollywood. They were 12 seed here in D2. They went on the road to Bravo. They gave it their best shot. They just came up a little bit short, so the road ends for them there. On the bottom half of this bracket, like I had said coming into it, I was very much looking forward to the potential of a semifinal or a quarterfinal between Chatsworth and Kennedy, because to me, when you look at those teams, aside from them being our Valley representatives, that would probably be left standing in this bracket, but just the idea that Chatsworth has been a team all season long that have kind of outplayed their expectations. Like I said, they're a D2 team, but at times they looked very, very capable of beating 1 teams, and they did at several points, Division 1 teams this season. And Kennedy is a team that started out slow. It was a rocky start to the season, but they've been a different team in the second half of the season. So it's not that much. It's not really an upset that they went on the road to beat Lincoln. In fact, that was an upset that we had predicted would probably happen just because of the kind of caliber of basketball that Kennedy has played the last 6 weeks of the season. So we do have a great matchup on our hands between Chatsworth and Kennedy, and the winner of that game has a great opportunity to go on and win a D2 championship. It won't be easy, especially when you're talking in terms of Chatsworth, who, will be expected to come out on top in that game. But once they get past that game, they're probably going to have to deal with the likes of a Marshall, and they'd probably have to go through San Pedro to win the D2 championship, which would be tough matchups for them. But they're fully capable of beating anybody that remains in this field in the Division 2 playoff. But Kennedy won't be easy to deal with. So that's going to be an intriguing matchup, one that I will be at on Valentine's night.
Wonder if the wife's going to be happy about that. I'll tell you. Sorry, babe, I got to work.
Yeah. And one note I will add to that, these 2 teams, Chatsworth and Kennedy, they did match up on December 6th. But like I said before, the Kennedy team that played on December 6th is a very different looking team that we've seen the last few weeks down the stretch of the season. Chatsworth won that game in the East Valley tournament pretty easily by 18 points. But like I said, this is a different Kennedy team. So if Chatsworth doesn't watch themselves, they could find themselves in a real dogfight tomorrow night.
Yeah, and very well could be. And that takes us into D3. And we had a couple of the play-in matchups. We had a couple teams with byes, and it was kind of shaky. And in the end of it, we have an all-valley matchup. Is the only thing left standing on that side of the bracket. So going to the top, Lakeview Charter defeated Collins Family. It was a 41-35 victory. They got their home game. They got their win, right? We were talking about this last time. You kind of feel like, hey, you made it. You got your home game. Good job. If you win, now you're playing with house money. And that was what happened. Harbor Teacher took out Lakeview Charter. And they're moving on to the quarterfinals. And moving into the bottom half of the bracket, we had the number 2 seed Vaughn. And that was the team that we believe was going to make a deep run, potentially could be the champion of this division. They did what we believed they were going to do. They took care of University and a 50-39 final. And that moves them into the quarters. And the matchup below was an all-valley matchup. Socius was hosting Triumph Charter in a 7-10 matchup. And I wouldn't necessarily call her an upset. I believe those teams were fairly evenly matched. And Triumph came out on top 36-33. And that sets up that all-valley quarterfinal. Vaughn will be hosting Triumph. And then at the bottom of the bracket, Panorama, again, got a win in their home game. They were hosting Animal Robinson 55-38. And unfortunately, that was the end of their run. Contreras put a hurting on them. It was a 76-31 final. And Contreras advances to face Southeast in the quarters. So all we have left here in D3 is Vaughn and Triumph. We believe in Vaughn in this division. It'll be a fun one to watch. Okay.
From the minute this bracket was released, and quite frankly, even before the playoffs started, we all knew the Division III playoffs would probably come down to George Washington Prep and Vaughn. Those have been the 2 strongest Division III teams all season long, and they both looked the part in their first round matchups. Vaughn had a little trouble with University, but that game was a little closer than the final score of that game looks a lot closer than those 2 teams actually were. I know Vaughn kind of took their foot off the pedal a little bit towards the end, and that's why that margin was only 11-point margin when the teams were kind of separated by more than that for most of the game. And when you look at a team like Triumph, they've had a good season, and yeah, them and Socius, it's splitting hairs at how and who's better between those two teams, and that the game itself sort of played out that way, with Triumph kind of eked out with a victory. Now, if you're Triumph, you've got a big hill to climb now in the quarterfinals, going against this Vaughn team that's really been a juggernaut amongst those teams in the little 3 conferences, as we call them, with the smaller schools here in the Valley. They've really been a juggernaut amongst those teams and amongst those schools. So it's going to be a difficult way for them to try to get through to playing Vaughn. But that's why we roll the balls out. You never know. You never know what can go on. Like I said, nobody thought Cleveland was going to go to Eagle Rock and win that game, and they did. So, you never know until you play the games. But Vaughn looked strong. George Washington Prep looked strong. And we'll see if those two teams can avoid any more hiccups or any pitfalls on their way to what feels like it might be an inevitable matchup in the D3 championship.
Yeah, and that rolls us right into probably the deepest representation for the Valley out of this specific set of brackets. D4 had multiple matchups for us in the last week. And starting up top of the play-in, Sun Valley Magnet was hosting Episcopal School, and they cleaned it up. It was 34-17. And they went on to face Voss, who was the number 1 seed. And this game was surprisingly close, just kind of based off of what it was. But all these teams are fairly equal, as we've said before, and Voss took it. It was a 30-36 final. Next up on the top of the bracket, Alliance Marine Institute took care of business against USC. It was a 36-9 final. So the quarterfinal will be Voss and Alliance Marine at the top part of the bracket. Next up, number 4 seed Community Charter eked out a win against Hawkins, 31-29 final. I don't have too much. I'm hoping Kenny has more there. They'll be facing New West in the quarterfinals. Moving on down, East Valley went on the road to Downtown Magnets and came away kind of decisively. It was a 39-23 final. And they're going to travel to face Robert Kennedy. And RFK was the school that was ultimately predicted to take this division by us. And so let's see if East Valley can try to pull up the upset and play bracket buster. And then at the very bottom, Chavez won its play-in against Daimali. It was a 49-18 rout. Unfortunately for them, there comes the heartbreak right after. They went into Wish, and it was a 39-38 final. Cinderella story ends there. Sorry, Kenny. And Wish will have Larchmont in the quarterfinals. So take it away. I know you're licking some wounds on Chavez, but it's gonna be a heck of a quarterfinal.
Yeah, like we kind of talked about, when you start going through these divisions, the further you get in from open to D1 to D2, D3, now into D4, the margins between these teams become smaller and smaller and less. And sometimes what that gives you is one hell of a playoff round. And what we saw in this round in D4 is, because there was so much parity between these teams, you saw close contests, you saw hard-fought contests, you saw some heartbreak, you saw some teams, pull some minor upsets, and five of the 8 matchups were decided by 7 points or less. So that tells you there was some good, hard, competitive basketball being played by these teams. And luckily for us, we started in this bracket with probably as deep a representation of Valley teams. And to be honest, in my opinion, I felt like a lot of the quality teams were from our end, the Valley end, and it's sort of born itself out here, where we've gotten to the quarterfinals, and 4 of the 8 remaining teams are from our neck of the woods. Starting with Voss and Alliance Marine doing what they had to do in those open rounds, because like I said, you can almost throw seeds out with a lot of these teams. Yes, you would expect Voss, who is supposed to be sort of the strongest team here in this bracket, to maybe not struggle as much out of the gate with a 16 seed, but it just kind of tells you how we're just kind of picking straws with these teams here in D4, and they kind of move on, and now they'll have another tough test and a sneaky good Alliance Marine team who we haven't talked a lot about this year, but they've had a good season and they're fully capable of going in the Voss and pulling an upset. So Voss better be ready for that contest. Community Charter is another team. They've been sneaky good this year. They had some issues with Hawkins, but you win games any way you can, and they'll a 2-point win is still a win. They'll move on, and then they'll have their crack at New West Charter in the quarterfinals on the top end of the bracket. Now moving to the bottom side, I was surprised from the Valley, East Valley, who they've been a bit of an up and down team, but they do have a couple of girls that, if matchups break right, they can cause you some issues. And we've seen that with them being able to go into Downtown Magnet. And of all the teams in that first round, outside of Robert Kennedy, they actually kind of had a comfortable victory. Robert Kennedy handled business with math and science, which was the most lopsided game from that first round of action. But East Valley actually kind of had their way with Downtown Magnet as well, setting up a matchup between them and Robert Kennedy in the next round. Again, we think Robert Kennedy is the team to beat here, or has the capability of winning this whole thing, so it won't be easy for East Valley, but don't count out East Valley. They play in the Valley League, and it was a round robin of chaos for a lot of part of the year with East Valley, Voss, Vaughn, Northridge Academy. There's quality teams there. The East Valley has had to play against all those teams, And similar to what we're seeing with Cleveland, they're getting into D4 now and playing these teams on this level, and they might feel like it's not as hard as what they had to deal with playing in the Valley League. So we'll see what they can do. We'll see if they can give Robert Kennedy a scare. And what's positive is when you look at the top side of that bracket, 3 of the 4 teams remaining on the top side of that bracket, all from the Valley. So we've got about a 75% chance to get at least one representative into the D4 championship, which is exciting.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not gonna start breaking numbers here because I don't want to get into any Steiner math. But yeah, we'll jump into the D5 bracket, and we didn't have too much representative in that sense. There was a few. Roy Ball went in hosting Lake Balboa College, and they ran away. It was basically a boat race. It was a 44-16 final. And Roy Ball advances to face the number 1 seed Fremont, who we have going all the way to the final. Then the other play-in Discovery Prep in Pacoima took care of business against Cal's Early College. It was a 51-30 final, and they went into Camino Nuevo and played them tough. 6-point final was a 40-34 finish, but Camino Nuevo advances to the quarterfinals. And then underneath, at the bottom, you had North Valley Military Institute handle their home game against University Pathways. It was a 39-22 final, and they advanced to face Fauché, who beat USC. It was a 34-26 final over USC Hybrid. And so 2 of the picks that we had going into the finals survived. They're in the quarters. So NVMI is facing Fauché, and Fremont is in. So we've got 1 rep left in D5. There's hope that they can do something. Kenny, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to add on D5 because we only have NVMI left really as our representation. But like I said, by the time you get to D4 and D5, we roll the balls out and we let the mayhem commence and see who is left standing at the end. I will put my money on the Military Institute to survive some chaos and mayhem when it comes to when these teams are pretty evenly matched. So we're going to see. I think they've got a good shot. I mean, Fauché will not be an easy matchup for them, but they definitely have the capability of pulling it out because all of these teams are so even in D5. And yeah, we're going to see where it goes. I still think MVMI and Fremont have the best shots to get to that championship. Just how things are kind of broken down, but we'll see what they can do.
Yeah, it's an exciting week of basketball. There's a couple of matchups midweek leading up to the semifinals on Saturday. We will not have anything for you in terms of a podcast breaking down, but next week we will have a full recap of the quarterfinals and the semifinals, and we'll give you your primer going into the finals. It's exciting, so get out there, support these girls. Typically, girls' games don't draw as much as boys, but I'm telling you, they don't play on the same nights. They don't play at the same times. Get out there, support your team, support these girls. They love playing in front of packed gyms, and it's something they don't get to do nearly as often. So get out there, celebrate them, let them know that what they're doing at this point in the season is special. We're out here, we're showing the love. You guys do the same. Show the love.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that before we sign off, head to Instagram, go to King Drew's Instagram, and just check out the scenes from that Birmingham King Drew matchup. Every game these girls play in the playoffs should and can feel like that atmosphere was. So, like we were saying, get out and support these young ladies who are playing their hard. They're busting their behinds. They're working hard. They're all working towards a goal. And all of our Valley teams, make sure we get out here and we support them. We go out there, we take the drives in the semifinals and go see them where they're playing. Just support our girls because they're working their butts off. They have all year, and this is go time. They're so close. So many of them are so close to realizing a dream that they've been working to for more than a few years now. So just go out there and support them. Go fill these gyms up. Go cheer them on, and go root them on and see if they can bring the Valley some more championships.
And on that note, we will see you all next week.
Peace.